First, we're going to look at the chords for Study 1. This is the first example appearing in bar 1. Most of us are familiar with the standard open A power chord. Power chords at their most basic level consist of a root note and its fifth. In example 1, there is the addition of the octave on the G string. This is basically the root note in a higher register. So let's break that down. A is our root note, E is our fifth, and this is our octave A, or the root in a higher register. Next, we're going to take a look at example 2. This also appears or first appears in bar 1. Example 2 replaces the octave with the minor second one semitone higher on the G string. So the A note we had in example 1 is moved up a semitone higher to the B flat or A sharp note. Combined with the open A string as our root note and the E note our fifth, it will sound like this. The minor second conflicts wonderfully with the root note, as it does with the fifth. This combination is perhaps one of the most effective alterations for achieving darkness and dissonance. Example 3, first appearing in bar 2. This replaces the fifth of the A power chord with the minor sixth. So whereas in example 1 we had the A and the E note here, well, this fifth will be moved up to the F note, leaving the root A on the G string, as well as the open A string root. You could look at this as a small F chord, F being the root, A being the third, combined with the A bass. The tension created here is great, but must be resolved, which it does in the third bar. Example 4, first appearing in bar 5. This time round we have our root note, the fifth, and the major second. This voicing is one of my favourites and might best be described as a musical match made in heaven. Or is that hell? The addition of the major second to the root and fifth blends perfectly, even with lots of distortion. Example 5, first appearing in bar 5. This voicing occurs at the very beginning of bar 5, but only briefly before transforming into the previous example we looked at. This is an A minor chord, using the notes A, E, and C. Resolving back to example 4 lessens the tension somewhat. As a good exercise, we could try arpeggiating both examples in a made-up creation. It can sound very cool when switching back and forth. Let's look at a quick example by picking the A string, then the D string, and then the G string. And then the same for example 4. And alternating. Example 6, first appearing in bar 4. Technically, this example first appears in the fourth bar, in the last half, but only very briefly. It really starts to kick in at bar 7. In the first example, I mentioned the choice between 2 and 3 note voicings, depending on what we are going for. Bars 7 and 8 make a great example of this, adopting a simpler, more focused approach using only the root note with either the addition of the minor sixth or seventh. So in this example, we simply use the A string, with the F note on the D string. Example 7, first appearing in bar 7. So carrying on from the previous example, we begin to see that by employing certain intervals with a root note, we are able to create some nice atmospheric ideas. Let's alternate between example 6 and example 7. Note that in the example just played, I resolved to the A fifth power chord. For examples 8 and 9, we are utilizing an inverted shape. This simply means that the fifth is on the bottom, the lowest note. The root note is sandwiched between the fifth and its octave. So let's take a look at that. In example 8, we have the notes C, F, and C. The C note is our fifth, which is on the bottom, since this is the inverted shape. Our F is on the D string, so we bar our first finger over both. And we also have our C note there, that's our fifth, and it's actually the octave from this C note. Now this makes a great way of just providing some variation from the standard, say, F power chord. And it's fattened up quite a bit by adding in the C note there. So this is what example 8 sounds like. Example 9 is simply the same shape moved a whole step higher. And that will sound like this. Now, this one doesn't last long, only appearing briefly. It acts as a transition into the last 8 bars. The sound of this chord signifies the musical ascent, or climbing towards the climax. Example 10, first appearing in bar 29. This voicing is basically made up of the same notes as the first example, that being the A power chord, only that 2 of the notes, apart from the open 5th string, are in the next octave. So we have the open A string, the A note at the 7th on the D string, and we have the E note at the 9th fret on the G string. The open A string and the A note at the 7th fret on the D string combine to create a droning unison-like effect. Note that I'm only playing the A string and the D string in that case. And this is very useful for fattening up the sound. Example 11, first appearing in bar 29. This is an interesting voicing, drawing its power from the tension produced between the A string and the B flat note. The B flat note being at the 8th fret on the D string combined with the open 5th string. Take note that the intervallic distance is still a minor second, but the root note is in the lower octave. So for example, being the B flat note here, in the same octave the root note would be just here. That's the A note. And is a minor second interval. In this case though, we're replacing that A note with the open A string, which creates more space, but still the dissonance we need. Then with the addition of the D note at the 7th fret on the G string, we complete what is a most ominous sounding chord. Example 12, first appearing in bar 30. The only difference in this example and example 11 is that the 4th is replaced with the 5th. So in this case we have the B flat note with our open A string, but then we're going to replace the D note with the E note instead. And by looking at the B flat and the E notes on their own, the B flat might be considered the root note, with the E being a flattened 5th from the F note. We can see this more clearly by fretting a standard B flat power chord shape on the D string, flattening the 5th, same two notes. Combined with the A string, and another dark voicing presents itself. Example 13, first appearing in bar 31. This is an F major 7 chord without its third, and it makes a refreshing change from the standard power chord voicing commonly employed by most. This is another one of those noisy voicings that sound very nice with some high gain. In this case we have the F as our root, the C as our 5th, and our major 7th is the E note on the G string. Example 14, first appearing in bar 32. This is the actual same chord type as example 4, only moved up into the 8th position. So this time around we have F as our root, C as our 5th, and G will be our major 2nd. Again, this really does help to mix things up, creating a more melodic atmosphere rather than just sticking with a standard power chord shape, by moving back instead. And actually we do revert back to the standard F power chord right at the end, just providing some further variety. Now we arrive at the breakdown for study 1. Now what I'm going to be doing here is just playing through each 4 bars with any hints and tips along the way if necessary. Most of the rhythmic concepts in this are fairly straightforward because we're either using 8th notes or quarter notes. There's also a healthy dose of some fast tremolo strumming, I guess you might call it, and we're going to take a look at that rhythm specifically when we arrive at it. Now to begin, so each example will be played at a slower tempo. Make sure that you've studied the chord charts before you begin practicing this stuff, just to get familiar with where each chord shape appears and in what order. Okay, so this is bars 1 to 4. And we're going to do that one more time. Now we're starting from the 5th bar, at which point we transform into our next shape. This one's the more stretched out one, the A minor chord. So here's bars 5 to 8. Just be careful here to not play beyond the string that you should be. So there are mostly 3-string shapes, but towards the end of this there's the 2-string idea, or the A and the D string. So make sure you produce a halting sort of motion to stop once you've strummed through the 4th string. Now this is where the sextuplet rhythm kicks in. Now this is reasonably challenging if you haven't done this sort of thing before, so I'm going to spend a bit of time on this bit. A sextuplet rhythm involves playing 6 of either a note or a chord within the space of 1 beat. Now I'm going to play the example just a little bit quicker to start with so you can see that. Now there's 2 lots of the sextuplet before we transform into the extended or altered A5 power chord. Sounds like this. One more time. Now if we listen to that percussively, what we hear is this. Now if we slow that down, as far as tips go here, I just recommend being very loose in the wrist, because as soon as you lock the wrist, you're then going to be using muscles in the shoulder and the elbow area, and you don't really want to do that. Long term, it's not so good for the body. Now there's always going to be a little bit of tension when you play. There has to be, because you have to grip the pick and you have to move, of course. So just be willing to drop as much tension as possible. So in other words, you're only aiming to have as much tension as necessary to play it comfortably. Okay, so moving on, this sextuplet rhythm comes up quite a bit from here on in. In the next bar after the previous bit we looked at, we're only using 2 strings, so you'll just want to make sure that you're muting the 1st to the 3rd string. And what I do is I just let the 1st finger wrap across those 3 strings. My thumb also sits on the 6th string, preventing string 6 from ringing out. So this bar I'm going to play a bit slower for you. This is bar 10. You'll also note there that the thumb really has to come away at the end there, because we have to stretch out to the 5th fret for that chord. All I can recommend doing there is to avoid playing string 6. That's what I do. And if in the worst case scenario you play string 6, it's got a certain charm about it. It just sounds a bit kind of muddier. In fact, it's an inverted A5 power chord. So moving on, we're going to look at bars 11 and 12 together. Slower tempo. One more time. Now for bars 13 and 14. Now again, this presents the issue of string 6, so what you'll need to do is either restrict yourself not to playing it, or if you do happen to play it, just being happy with that for the time being until you're able to restrict yourself. With a short halting strumming motion, nice and relaxed, you shouldn't have too many issues with that. You can also use, if you wanted to, the middle finger just very lightly over string 6. The problem with that, I guess, is when you make the change. So I think just doing what I'm doing, or aiming to do that, which is just a short, controlled strumming motion, avoiding string 6, that will work pretty good. So in this case, we've got the 2 chords, and then the next bar we're using just the 2 strings. You'll also note there that this time we have to do 4 lots of the sextuplet, which is quite demanding for the right hand. So if you need to, you'll just need to break it up until you've got the stamina to do that. Into the 15th bar, we've got 4 more groups of the sextuplet rhythm, followed by the 16th bar where we're back to 2 strings, and we're also using like a pull-off technique here on the 5th and the, well actually it's on the 4th string, but the 5th string keeps ringing out. So we've got so note in the 16th bar I'm strumming and I'm pulling off to the 2nd fret. You'll also notice that the first finger's down to begin with, and this is good because otherwise then we have to put the finger down as we do the pull-off, which is not something that I'd recommend. So this is bars 15 and 16 once more. Continuing on now to the 17th and 18th bar. Let's repeat that for good measure. No pun intended. Now the rhythm varies itself a little bit here with the 8th notes, quarter notes, and the sextuplet rhythm because we start with 2 8th notes, and this is in the 19th bar by the way, so we start with, stay on that chord, and then we do a sextuplet. Followed by 2 8th notes and a quarter note at the end of that bar. So this is bar 19. In bar 20, we start with 2 sextuplets followed by 2 8th notes and a quarter note. So let's try bars 19 and 20 together. Okay, it should be a pretty smooth ride from here on in. We've got mostly quarter notes, in fact, pretty much all quarter notes, right until the very end where we just play the last chord and slide out. So we're going to be going from bar 21. Okay, we arrive now for study 2, and this is quite different from the first study. Now the first thing that you'll notice is a lot of the chord shapes to begin with are just two strings. So we have the A string and the D string being used. The first thing to understand about the riffing here in the, it's pretty much like the first 8 bars, is that what I'm doing is I'm using the A minor scale on the D string mixed in with the open 5th string. So the A string or the 5th string remains static. You could refer to this as pitch axis, so it's staying the same. And the other notes around it are changing. And we're actually going, quite a way up, I think to about the 10th fret here. So first we'll take a look at a 1 octave A minor scale on the D string. Now this doesn't start on the A note of course, but it's still the A minor scale just starting on the D note. So we have the notes D, which is the open string, open 4th string, E, F, G, root note A, B, C, and for good measure we'll complete the octave even though we're not using it, and that's D at the 12th fret. Like I said, the 5th string is always the same, so it stays open. The minor scale notes change around it. So this creates a droning, tense sort of atmosphere in things. A band I like a lot, Primordial, tend to use this sort of idea a lot in their music, so you'll recognize it from that. And it's got sort of a tinge of Opeth, I think, as well. Okay, other notes. This is a triplet rhythm. So that means that there's 3 notes per beat. And the general tempo is about this. So when you think of a triplet, you're thinking... Now if we slow that rhythm down in the first couple of bars, we'll look at bars 1 and 2 with the left-hand view and we'll see how that sounds. You could play that without the 5th string and that gives you a good idea of the rhythm also. Take note of the pick strokes I'm using there. Also take note that there's a pattern going on because I'm picking, hammering and re-picking. Then I'm picking, pulling and re-picking. So it's kind of like an up and down idea. To begin with anyway. And that varies in and over the next few bars also. So it's not always going to be in that pattern, but for the first couple of bars that's about the general idea. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're just going to take a look at this in 4-bar chunks. So I'll be playing bars 1 to 4 a couple of times through, which it actually does in the tune, and then we're going to take a look at bars 5 to 8. Here we go. Take note that the thumb is muting string 6. That gets rid of the problem there. And as from the previous study, I'm wrapping the first finger across the higher strings as I'm fretting the D string. Now from this point we use some higher notes within the scale. So we're starting on the B note, which is the major second in the A minor scale. I'm going to use that with the C note, so there's a nice tense sort of feel to that. So So this one revolves around those notes and also the G note down at the 5th fret. So there's basically 4 notes in this. And it's a little bit harder, this part, so you may have to slow it down. I'll leave the left-hand fingerings up to you. You can also study what I did in the introduction performance. Okay, so here's bars 5 to 8. Now take note here that the 7th and 8th bar repeat themselves 3 times, or are played 3 times. Bars 5 to 6 are only played once in this sequence. Okay, now we're into bar 9, and this is the middle period of the study. Now basically what's happening here is these are 2-string chords again. What I'm doing is I'm using the general progression or the root note, which in this case is F, G, and A. So if we think about it in terms of a progression with just standard power chords, this is what it will sound like. But instead of sticking to that, which is okay, but that doesn't really create as much excitement and drama in the long term. So what we can do is we can change around some of the notes on the A string and create some tension in that way. So for example, in the 9th bar, I'm using the F5 for half the bar, and then I'm flattening the 5th down to the B note. So we get... In the 10th bar, I go back to the F5, and instead of doing a G power chord, I'm using the G root note with its 3rd, the B note. So we get a nice harmonious sound here. I always think Orion by Metallica when I hear that sort of thing. In fact, the next chord as well. So it's like you're harmonizing the root note with its 3rd, only that you're doing it completely on your own, as opposed to having another guitarist going, with you going. Of course, it's a little noisier, but for this style of music, it sounds good that way. Carrying on into the 11th bar, the A root note is being harmonized by its 3rd, the C note. Of course, then we go back to the 10th bar shape for the G, harmonized by its 3rd. Now, as far as the rhythm goes, I have transcribed this as just straight triplets, so, you know, on the Guitar Pro it'll sound like this. The only problem with that rhythm is it tends to lose its definition. My preferred rhythm is what I actually play in the performance. So I'm leaving this open, either way works, and I just wanted to give everybody an option here. So you could just strum it straight out triplets. The rhythm that I actually use is this one. So I play it like this. Either way works, as I said, but try both and mix and match if you would like to do that. Okay, so into the 13th bar, you'll recognize some similarities here with the F, and then we're flattening the 5th again, or harmonizing it with that flattened 5th. But again, we need variety here. What I've done here is, instead of the back to the power chord, I'm actually using the 6th degree from the F root note, which is the D note. So again, we get a really nice sound that way. So it's back to the harmonized G, harmonized A. So I'm going to play bars 13 to 15. Now this time I'm going to harmonize the G note with the E note, which is the 6th degree from that note. So similarity there between this. In fact, it's the same distance apart when you look at it. Just a whole step higher. So let's listen now to the 13th to the 16th bar. Moving forward now into bar 17, so the common idea, F with its flattened 5th. This time back to that harmonized F with its 6th. We're going to go to this shape this time, so it's the standard G5 actually. So you see you can still use those standard shapes, but if you vary them up with the other things, then it's sort of more interesting that way. So let's look at the 17th and the 18th bar. And again. This is probably my favorite bit. So we go up to the A root note. We're going to harmonize that with its 6th, which is the F. Back to the standard A5, so really just the root harmonized with 5th there, which is what a power chord is. We're going to use the G note with its 6th, and standard G5. So you see what I was doing there was using the 6th and the 5th, down to G, 6th, and the 5th. Now once you learn all these ideas well, then you can just use your ears to mix and match and vary and even come up with newer things that you like on your own. So I'm going to play this entire mid-section. So we're going to go from the 9th bar all the way down to the 20th bar. And then we're going to look at the last part. Okay, now for the last part. Now what I'm doing here are simply inverted power chords with some little alterations. The first one is the F inverted, so we have the root F, its 5th, which is C, and we've also got the C octave on the bottom. Remembering that an inverted power chord uses the 5th on the bottom. It's just a kind of a cheap and easy way of getting a heavier sound without like tuning down to ridiculously low levels. It also helps to fatten up the sound. So in bar 21, we're using that, but we're going to drop the C octave down a half step. Now there are parallels here between what we did down here, which was, So it's really the same. The only difference being that we've got the C on the bottom as well. In bar 22 we go back to that inverted F. This time though we're going to use a different way for progressing into the G part of the progression. So what we're actually doing here is a similar idea to what we did here in a sense, because we've got the G harmonized with its third, but we're going to put the D note on the bottom. Now the D is the fifth, so this is actually like it's pretty much a G major chord just turned upside down. Remembering that in G major we have the notes G, B and D. That D note's on the bottom this time. So we get the inverted F, flatten that. Just keep the middle where it is, then bring your third and fourth finger up there. That's got a really nice sound about it, that one. Those inverted major voicings always sound good with distortion for some reason. And what we're doing here is a similar principle really, because we've got the A, so this is like A minor A, C, which is the third, and this time we've got the E, which is the fifth on the bottom. Whereas before at a standard A minor arpeggio, 1 octave, we just put that note on the bottom. And then we go back to our inverted G, and we're going to repeat those all again, those 4 bars in this section. So let's have a look at those first 4 bars of this section. It's from the 21st bar to the 24th bar. Now, if you listen carefully in the intro performance to this etude, or study 2, you'll notice that the G string was ringing out occasionally with these 2 voicings. And that's fine, that works, it still sounds pretty good. It kind of reminds me a bit of what Alcest do, because they've got that black gaze sort of sound where they'll combine the open strings with their power chords. So you can get some nice harmonic tension there. Even with the F shape. So you're droning notes on the top there, and that sounds pretty cool. Now all we do in the last 4 bars is really just a variation on a theme. So we're starting with our F, inverted F, and flattening the 5th. This time the changes are a bit easier because we just move the inverted shape up. So instead of the fancy stuff we did before, we're just moving the F up to the G inverted. Now this does have a musical purpose if you really do analyze it, because we're creating a melodic type of idea, because we've got this note here, so we've got this little, and moving that up again. So really listen out for that higher note, because you get an idea of what's happening melodically then. Let's have a listen to these 4 bars. Also in the transcription I've tabbed it as just simply inverted F, but I think in the introduction I included the open strings, and that can sound pretty cool too. So if you prefer that, you can always do that, and probably, I think, upstroke tends to sort of happen there, so let's have a listen. Yeah, so you should end on an upstroke. That's if you're adhering to that rhythm.